Good evening. Welcome to the special meeting of the Terre Haute City Council. It is 5:02 p.m. on Tuesday, September 7th, 2017. Roll call, Michelle, please.
Councilwoman Aller.
Present.
Councilman Azar.
Present.
Councilwoman Crossan.
Present.
Councilman DeBon.
Here.
Councilman Elliott.
Here.
Councilman Garrison.
Present.
Councilman Morris.
Here.
Councilman Nasser.
Present.
Councilman Nation.
Here.
All are present.
Thank you. The purpose of this special call meeting is to hear a presentation by Umbaugh & Associates concerning the 5-year financial plan and the 2017 DLGF budget plan of action. Mayor, I'll give you the opportunity to speak.
Mr. President, members of the council, Mayor Duke Bennett, I appreciate you scheduling this extra meeting so we'd have an opportunity to go through the plan. Umbaugh & Associates has been working with the city for about 20 years now and provide this service for us on a regular basis. This is a 5-year analysis that we've been talking about doing. They've been working on it since the first of the year, and so Paige is here tonight specifically to walk you through the plan. So we'll address both the 1782 notice, but kind of the 5-year plan. So the 1782 notice component is part of the 2017 part, and then there'll be additional years after that. And so the concept would be to go through the executive summary of this and refer to a variety of attachments and other supplementary documentations included in your handout. And she will stop for questions as we go, and there will be time at the end. And then when we're done, obviously, you may have other questions, and we would just ask you to put those in writing to us, and we'll get those answered as quickly as we can after the meeting today.
Okay, a few housekeeping before we go any further. You will make this financial plan available on the city website so people can review it?
Yes, it'll be public tonight.
Okay.
So,
But
yeah,
okay.
yeah, it'll be.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
this
then-
is the official document that
Okay.
you have
Well,
now.
'cause I know
The other
you-
one was
you-
a draft.
Okay, great.
Right.
Great. And then also, I want to make the public aware that we won't be accepting any comments or questions tonight regarding this. If you have any questions, next week would be the opportunity to do so during our meeting regarding the budget, as well as during public comments during our regular meeting. So,
Just
go ahead.
a couple other just quick comments. That this is a plan, and so it can change, and it will change. They always do, depending on revenues and expenses that may flow in. And so, Paige has been working on this right up until today, even, of putting new and updated information in, making sure that it's accurate as of today. And as we move forward, we just need to be mindful of that things do change. And so we can't, it is what it is today. We don't expect any dramatic changes, but I feel really good about the plan that she's going to present to you. So, Paige.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening. My name is Paige Sansone with H.J. Umbaugh & Associates. I am going to be walking you through the comprehensive financial plan. I handed one out to each of the council members. I'm going to try to hit just the highlights. I don't want to read this to you like a book. I'm going to hit the highlights, but there are going to be some areas that I will focus on more than others. Please feel free to stop me at any time and ask questions. I want to try to answer any questions that you might have. So I'm going to start on page number 2. That's where the executive summary starts. As you're well aware, the city has been significantly impacted by circuit breaker tax credits. So I want to spend a little bit of time on that concept. In 2008 is really when they were adopted into the state. They were phased in over 2009 and 10. In 2010, they were fully phased in, and now they're incorporated into the state constitution. So there are limits based on specific property types. For residential homeowners, the limit is 1% of the value of the home. So in other words, a residential homeowner should not be paying more than 1% of the market value of their home. Now, that could vary depending on whether there's a referendum, like a school referendum tax rate. Perhaps a taxpayer could actually pay more because you have to pay that referendum tax rate. That's outside the circuit breakers. But anyway, so there's 3 different levels of circuit breakers. 1% is the residential homestead. 2% is all other residential properties like rental properties, long-term care facilities, and agricultural properties. And then 3% is all other. Most taxpayers in the city's taxing districts are at the maximum limit for property taxes paid. So any future increase in property taxes paid is going to result from increases in the assessed value of the property and not necessarily increases in the property tax rate, because again, it's capped. So what I want to show you is the graph on page number 3 at the top of the page. Currently, in 2017, the city is losing 36% of the property taxes levied to circuit breaker. So let me explain this graph, because I think this is really telling a story. In 2008, the blue area of this chart is the net property tax. So in 2008, you were not affected or impacted by circuit breaker. So you were levying about $27.5 million, and you were collecting roughly that same amount, $27.5 million. Let's move up now to 2016. Your total levy, as certified by the DLGF, was about $32.7 million. In 2016, you collected roughly $21.6 million of those property taxes levied. So the red area of this chart is really the credits that are being provided to the taxpayers. Those are credits that are funded by the property tax, basically. It's property tax not paid by the taxpayers, so therefore you're not receiving it as a taxing unit. We are estimating that by 2021, those credits could go up to 39% of your taxes levied. So it's possible that by 2021, you could have $15.4 million of credits, $15.4 million of reduction of your property taxes levied. So if you really look at this chart, like the big picture of it, you, in 2016, you are only generating, you're generating 21% less property tax than you generated in 2008. So that really says something. That's how significant the city is being impacted by circuit breaker loss. By 2021, you'll be collecting 13% less than 2008. So you're not increasing your property taxes overall. It's actually going down compared to previous years. Let's move on to the next chart underneath that one. This shows you targeted funds, historical expenditures. So we picked the main funds that provide funding for your city operations. Those would be general, motor vehicle highway, local road and streets, park and rec, cemetery, transit, and waste and refuse collection. Also edit, Ray Park, and home and link. So those were the main funds we looked at. What we wanted to look at is, okay, we see that the revenue is going down for the city. What have the expenditures done during that time period? Really, they haven't increased all that much. In fact, from 2013 to 2016, your spending has gone down by $6 million. If you look at what you spent in 2008 in these funds, it was $48 million. In 2016, it was $51 million. So truly, again, you know, the reason why we're here tonight really comes back to those circuit breaker losses. Moving on to page number 4, I have another chart for you. This shows the property tax relief provided to not only the city of Terre Haute, but the other taxing units in Vigo County. So in 2017, the total circuit breaker credits, because that's a known number, the total circuit breaker credits are about $31 million throughout the entire county. 40% of those credits are provided to the residents of the city of Terre Haute. So 40% of those credits are being absorbed or, being offset by the city of Terre Haute. So what has the city done over the past few years? Well, since 2012, the city has taken steps to increase revenues where they can and reduce expenses. Some actions that have taken place since 2012 is that the edit fund is now being utilized more for operating expenses. Your CUME Capital Development Fund was reestablished back up to the maximum rate, so that actually helped you to generate a little bit more property tax for really any municipal purpose. You are collecting additional payment in lieu of taxes from the sanitary district. There's been a number of cost reductions since 2012, including reduction of staffing through attrition as people would leave the city or leave or retire. Those positions were eliminated. And then last year, the city adopted a trash collection fee of $10.25, and that will be phased in over the next 3 years, and it'll go up to a maximum of $11 in 2019. That is expected to generate $2.3 million. The cost, though, to provide that service is $2.6 million. So there is a deficit there, and that deficit will be picked up, at least we're making the assumption in this plan, that that deficit will be picked up from the edit fund. So what those fees cannot fund as far as trash removal, it will be picked up from the edit fund. Moving on to page 5 now, another chart for you. This is the targeted funds historical ending cash balances from 2011 through 2016. Cash balances in these funds, and again, these are the main funds that provide services to your community, they have decreased by $5.6 million since the end of 2011. But you can see that the downward trend was from 2012 to 2015. It has been corrected somewhat in 16. Your cash balances did go up. Now we're going to get into some of the concerns that we noted as we went through this analysis. So first off, the DLGF made a $7.9 million reduction to the city's 2017 adopted budget, and that was due to lack of sufficient funding. And I got to tell you, there was a change beginning in 2017 that really drove this. In 2016, the DLGF did not incorporate circuit breaker losses in calculating the certified budget. So this really wasn't an issue in 16. In 17, the state was required to incorporate those circuit breaker losses. So when you put in those losses, it clearly shows that this budget cannot be funded. So the city has developed a plan now to fund the full amount of the budget reductions. There's a combination of things that were done. One is the extension of the temporary loan from redevelopment. There was some reallocation of expenses. And in fact, if you go to page number 6, this is a summary of the city's plan. And this plan was discussed with the Department of Local Government Finance, or a draft of it, and they seemed pretty comfortable that they would approve additional appropriations based off of this plan that was presented to them. So this summary shows the estimated ending cash for December 31st of 2017 before we make any adjustments. So at the end of this year, for instance, in the general fund, if we made no adjustments, it would be negative $8.156 million. However, the city has developed a plan to not only eliminate the deficit, but fund those appropriations that were reduced by DLGF. One of the items is to extend the repayment of the redevelopment loan. So instead of paying it back this year, they're going to extend payment, or the assumption is that the payment will be extended until June 30th of 2018. Another option or assumption for the plan is to reallocate expenses that were scheduled to be paid out of the general fund, reallocate those to the edit fund. And that's about $2 million, $2,042,000. Another action item is to reallocate expenses to an EMS fund. There are some EMS items that were scheduled to be paid out of the general fund that can now be reallocated to this other fund, this EMS fund. reallocate expenses to Cume Capital Development. That's also an option. So if all those options are exercised, then you should be able to end the year with about $183,000. Now, what may change that number a little bit is something that you're going to see in the schedules when we get to the detail, is that not only are you affected by circuit breaker loss, but you are also affected by possible delinquencies, taxpayer appeals, things that you really don't have a lot of control over. So you'll see in our plan that we've built in a 1.3% shortfall in addition to circuit breaker. And we did that because the average over the last 2 years, the average of the additional loss was 1.3%. So you're going to see that, we may not get to a zero balance in our detailed schedules, but that's because we're using a number of different assumptions. But it's really hard to predict with the delinquencies and the taxpayer appeals. So you can see, we'll move on to police pension. We're assuming a transfer from rainy day of $200,000. That will be additional revenue to get into the police pension fund. And then transferring out group health insurance that was originally budgeted from police pension, now transferring those appropriations to edit. Parks, also reallocating some expenses to edit and to parks non-reverting. And then you can see the rest of the funds going across what those reallocations do to those particular funds. So for instance, the edit fund, we have a projected ending cash of almost $5 million. Once we apply those reallocations, now we're down to $2.2 million. So these funds can withstand those reallocations. So this is a plan that will eliminate the deficits and fund the budget reductions that were provided to the city through the 1782 notice process. Since this is a pretty important piece of this, I'll stop now and see if there's any questions for me. And I'm going to get a drink of water. Questions?
Councilman Nation.
Page, I see that the biggest balance at the end of the year under this draft is $2.1 million in edit. Why would you leave $2.2 million in edit and rather than reducing the dependency on the redevelopment loan?
You could certainly do that. The reason that we have it initially in this plan is to allow the city to have some flexibility in case some items would come up, some unforeseen expenses. We really wanted you to have that flexibility to be able to use that. But what you mentioned is definitely an option. Now that we have this model developed, we can work in options that you might come up with to see how it might work best for the city.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so moving on then to page number 7, some other areas of concern. Obviously, I'm sure you're all aware of this. The biggest area of concern as we were going through this is the deficit fund balances directly related to those circuit breaker losses. You had 3 funds. The top 3 funds that had negative balances were the general fund, negative $8.1 million. By the way, this was at the end of 2016. Holman Links non-reverting, negative $3.8 million, and Ray Park non-reverting, negative $1.1 million. Other areas of concern is in 2014, the State Board of Accounts issued their audit, and I know you just had an audit recently, but State Board of Accounts did express their concern for the continued solvency of the city. When you see negative cash balances of that significance, that's what comes out of that. And then in March of 2017, S&P lowered the city's credit rating 4 notches. That really affects the city's ability to access needed capital in the future. So we know what you're facing. Again, I'm going to go back to circuit breaker credits. I probably wouldn't be standing here today if it wasn't the significant impact that you've had from the circuit breaker credits. So what are the next steps? As we went through this plan, we wanted 2 things: to eliminate those deficits and get the cash reserves in the main operating funds up to the level of 15%. When I say 15%, let me explain that. We would like for you to end the year in a major operating fund with a cash reserve equal to 15% of your disbursements in that fund. And that's a minimum recommendation. And that's something that bond rating agencies would typically look at if you were trying to issue bonds, because it shows some, financial stability. So as we work through this, this is just a target. Your target may be something different. Maybe your target's 10% or 20%. But this is a place to start, and that's where we started in this report. So, looking at that, we noted that it would take an additional revenue stream of $3.8 million annually to eliminate the deficits and bring your cash reserves up in those main operating funds to 15%. And you've got a few options that you can do as a city, and I'll outline those. One is you can establish a municipal wheel tax. That would generate an estimated $1.4 million. Now, obviously, that has to go for a specific purpose, road improvements, replacements, et cetera. But what that would do is it would free up property tax that's currently going into the motor vehicle highway fund. So it could still help your general fund. I mean, $1.4 million would be very helpful. Maybe free up some dollars in edit if you're currently using edit for road improvements. So that can help. Another area is, and this is not really in your control, is that the county could increase the local income tax. So that's another area of opportunity. Something that is within the city's control is you might think about establishing a fire territory. We did a brief analysis on this. It would take a more in-depth analysis to find out exactly how it would impact the city. But in our brief analysis, we noted that it could possibly save the city $1.3 million. And all that would take is the city joining in with another taxing unit that touches its boundaries. And basically, then the fire department could start with a brand-new levy, and that levy would be completely and separate from the city. So that's an opportunity as well. We've got a few other options that don't have a lot of significant impact. You can kind of read those on your own, but those were the three major options. So let's go to page 10 just to summarize those, the deficit and the fund balances first, and then we'll go back and summarize the options again. So on page 10, what I have up there at the top, again, we picked out some of the major funds. We have estimated beginning cash January 1st of negative $2.2 million. This is not just the general fund. It's general, MVH, local road and street, park, cemetery, edit, transit, refuse, Holman Links, and Ray Park. Okay, so those are the main funds. So we start out with that potential negative amount. Then we said, okay, how much more money do we need to bring each of these funds up to a 15% cash reserve? So general fund, for example, we would need $9.6 million. MVH we don't need because they're already at the 15%, et cetera, going down the line. So in total, what we would need to eliminate that deficit and bring the fund balances up to 15%, we would need about $18.9 million. That seems like a big number, right? So what we thought is, okay, what if you just did this over a 5-year period? That makes it more manageable. Now, you could decide, let's try to do it over a 7 or 8 year period. But again, we have this model set up, very easy to build in an assumption such as that. But if we do it over 5 years, that means you would need a new revenue stream or budget reductions, that's the other side of it, but we're going to call it a revenue stream, of $3.8 million a year for the next 5 years. So again, just to summarize the options on page 11, it could be if the county were to adopt a LIT, for instance, that could possibly generate 3.9, and it really depends on what level of LIT. We're just making an assumption here. Municipal wheel tax, $1.4 million. Fire territory potential, $1.3. And again, if the county would adopt a LIT, that would free up some monies that are currently being paid to the county for dispatch. That could be an option as well. So we have more options available to you than the 3.8, but I understand that some of these options are not under your control, but these are the options that we found for you. Any questions so far? Okay. So now, starting on page 10, this is where, or I'm sorry, page 15, this is where we're going to be getting into a lot of detail. And I don't know how much detail you really want to go into, so I'm going to try to summarize this, but again, stop me if you have questions, or just stop me and say, hey, Paige, we don't need this much detail. I'll do whatever you wish to do with this. So page 15, this is your general fund. Let me just direct you to specific line items. That'll make it easier. We have an index, some numbers on the left-hand side of the page. What I would like to direct you to is line 17. That's your total operating receipts. That line is very important because when we talk about balanced budgets, what we're talking about is having budgets that equal those operating receipts. So we've got some historical information there for you. So you can see in 2015, your actual receipts were $29 million, 2016, $32.1 million. Going forward, your receipts, unfortunately, don't increase very much. Again, circuit breaker impacts. So we're looking at 2018, since you're into the 2018 budget process, we have estimated receipts of about $32.7 million. So that's kind of where your budget should be. Unless you want to build cash reserves, then you want to budget below that. Line 32, your total operating disbursements. So you can see kind of what you've spent in the past. You spent about $32 million in 2015. 31.6 in 2016. When you go to 17, you're going to see all those shifts where we started shifting appropriations out. So line 26, 27, 28, those are shifting to other funds like EDIT, EMS, and CCD. Line 29, you actually see appropriations coming back into the fund starting in 2018. Those are health insurance costs that have been paid out of police and fire pensions. This makes an assumption that those will now be back into the general fund. And then, that's the assumptions, and that was part of the plan that we put together. If you go to page 16, you can see the projected ending cash balances, which are it's on line 54. So you can see how those have changed over the last 2 years, and then what we're projecting for 17, 18, 19 moving forward. Now, those options I showed you, I think it was on page 10, not all of those are worked into here because obviously you haven't approved those options. So we wanted to show you without options, how would it look. The only option that we did work into this is extending the loan repayment and the shifting of appropriations. The other options, like the LIT and some of those other things, we did not work into this. Page 17 is the Motor Vehicle Highway Fund. So line 12 is the total operating receipts. And you can look for yourself. It's varied, but we'll just say it's around $3 million. I can tell you a bit of good news is that in 2018, because of the legislation that passed this year, you should expect to see a 19% increase in your state distributed motor vehicle highway distributions. So that is helpful. That's about a $400,000 increase from what you're experiencing now. If we drop down to line 22, we are assuming a shift beginning in 2018 of appropriations from MVH, Motor Vehicle Highway, to local road and street. And we did that, we made that assumption because your local road and street has a fund balance available to cover some of these items. So it alleviates the burden in this fund, and what we were able to do by doing that is if you look up on line 2, the property tax, we were able to shift all that property tax to general for that year. And you have the ability as the city council to allocate those property taxes the way you see fit to these funds. So, you can see property tax going back into this fund in 19, 20, and 21, but if there's a chance to shift property tax to general, we would certainly encourage that, and you have an opportunity to do that, at least in 18. Then on line 32 are the ending cash balances, and you can see that you had built up a reserve over the past 2 years, so we're just utilizing that reserve in order to get some additional revenues going into the general fund. Page number 18 is the local road and street fund. Again, because of the legislation that was passed, you're going to experience an increase in your state distributions. That's on line 2. So currently in 17, we're estimating you'll receive about $487,000. In 2018, it should be somewhere around $730,000. That allowed us then to, in part, shift some of those appropriations from MVH to local road and street. So you can see that that will still leave you with what we have budgeted up there. That will still leave you with a 5% reserve. So some of these funds, the way we made our assumptions, we were able to keep a 5% reserve, but again, we would like to see you build that up to 15% into the future. Page 19 is the Parks and Recreation Fund. Again, I'll direct you to line 10, which is the total operating receipts. Over the past couple years, it's been about 2.2 million. Going forward, there's a little bit of an increase there, and again, we tried to allocate enough property tax to those funds going forward that you maintained a 5% cash reserve. You can also see in 2017, as part of the city's proposed plan, excuse me, we've assumed a shift of appropriations from park to edit, and then also park non-reverting. That's on lines 18 and 19. And then line 32, the ending cash balances for those funds. Page 20 is the cemetery fund. Total operating receipts are on line 11. Running, I'm going to say about $600,000. Your disbursements have been roughly about that amount, so this fund isn't really using a lot of cash reserve. And in this plan, we've allowed it to maintain a 5% cash reserve. Page 21 is the Economic Development Income Tax Fund. Now, this fund is where, as we've been talking about, we've shifted, at least made the assumption that we're going to shift all these appropriations to this fund. And you can see them all coming in lines 12 through 15. But even doing that, there is a cash reserve maintained between 20 and it gets near 30, it gets to 30% in 2018. So yes, to go back to the previous question, you could potentially use these monies to reduce the loan from redevelopment, but you also want to allow yourself some flexibility in case something should come up. Another piece of information that I have in here that I want to direct to you is line 3. That's your state distribution, your local income tax revenue. We do have the certified number now, so this is a known number. So unfortunately, it went down a little bit. In 2017, you're getting $4,964,000. In 2018 now, it's been certified. You will get $4,861,000. Page 22 is the transportation fund. This fund, because of the cash reserves over 2016 and what we anticipate for 17, we were able to shift property tax from this fund as well to the general fund. So what we've tried to do, if you look on line number 2, for 3 years we're projecting no property tax on this fund because it's going to have enough revenue to support itself. Now, we do think that by 2021 you'll have to put a property tax back on. But what you need to know is that you've got this maximum levy limitation of X amount of dollars. You can shift it to your controlled funds as you deem appropriate. So that's what we've tried to do here, just to maintain some reserve levels, something in there, and then try to get as much into general as possible. Page 23 is the waste and refuse collection non-reverting fund. Line number 2 are the fees that were implemented, so you can see how they're being phased in. They should go up to a maximum of about $2.3 million in 2019. The contractual payments are $2.6 million. So you can see on line 6, those are the estimated deficits, meaning we're projecting that that amount of expenditure cannot be funded in this fund should those receipts not come in sufficiently. So the plan is then to shift those appropriations to edit. They'll get funded. They're just going to get funded out of edit if need be.
Paige,
Yes.
looking at those numbers for the trash contractual payment, line 5, you've just got it at $2.6 million running all the way out to 2021. Don't those numbers automatically escalate? per the
Yes.
contract?
They do.
Is that
Yeah,
accounted for somewhere in here?
We'll need to adjust that because we did just flatline them.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So if we do adjust that going up, then it's going to be a little bit more that would come out of edit. But edit, as you can see, can withstand some more appropriation if necessary. Page number 24 is the Home and Links Fund. Line number 2 are the receipts. So the receipts have varied, but let's just say it's roughly $450,000. I'm just trying to average it. But the expenditures out of that fund have been over $800,000. So there's an average use of cash reserves basically of about $350,000 a year. So there's a funding gap there that needs to be resolved. And page 25 is the Ray Park Fund. Has about the same amount of revenues, about we'll just average 430,000. But the disbursements are running close to 700,000, at least that's what we're projecting into the future. So there's an annual use of cash of $200,000 a year.
Page.
Yes.
When I look at the pages that have preceded this, I see that the goal has been to get into the positive, but going into the future. But on these two funds, they're allowed to stay in the negative. Can you explain that?
They are shown in the negative because these two funds cannot have a property tax levy. So the only way we can generate additional dollars is to increase receipts, like charges for services, or you could pay for some of these items out of your edit fund.
Boy, that edit fund's sure emptying out fast.
Yes, it is.
Thanks.
Excuse me, Paige, did you take into consideration the Holman Center and the police station bond or ban that we haven't allocated to do those projections?
No, those are not being considered. I don't know that I'm necessarily aware of that either. Oh, the Holman Center piece is, the $500,000 is in the edit fund budget. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Okay.
It is in the edit fund budget, yes.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. It is accounted for, yes. Page 26 is your rainy day fund. Unfortunately, there's not a lot left in that fund. In 2017, on line 8, we are showing a transfer out of $200,000 to the police pension fund, and that really is to get rid of that deficit in police pension. Then going forward, you have the $151,000. The only way you can build up this fund really is to make transfers from the general fund. Well, you're not in a position to do that right now, obviously. Now, sometime in the future, if the state makes special distributions of local income tax, they will require you to deposit it into this fund. So there's always a chance of that, but right now, the only way you're going to be able locally to get money into that fund is to transfer from the general fund. Page 27 is your cumulative capital improvement fund. This is the fund that is primarily funded by cigarette tax. The state is estimating a little bit of a decline in that tax for 2018. So in 17, you're collecting about $158,000. We're expecting it to go down to $134,000. We did flatline that revenue stream. Something that you may want to know about this fund is that the council has the authority at any time throughout the year to transfer monies out of this fund into the general fund. Right now, we're just showing that you're going to spend everything that you have available each year, but if you're not going to spend it, you do have the authority by council resolution to make a transfer into general. That would help build those balances in the general fund. Cume Capital Development, on page 28, the city has done a good job of reestablishing the rate periodically. When you established this rate initially for Cume Capital Development, you were at the maximum per statute. But there's something in the statute that says every time there's a change in your assessed value, particularly when it increases, they have to adjust, the state has to adjust this rate downward. So unfortunately, periodically, you need to reestablish to get up to the max. So you're pretty close to the max. You're generating net property tax, you're generating about $500,000. So going forward, we just kind of estimated average receipts of about $550,000 going forward. But this fund, something you need to know is this fund can be used for any municipal purpose. It's not just capital development. Page 29 is the fire pension fund. This fund, you can see, had a deficit in 2015, but it was able to get back up into the black in 2016. So what we did with this fund, really, there's a couple of things that we did, is we are assuming a shift of those non-pension items, those health insurance items, out of this fund into the general fund going into the future. And we've also shifted some of the tax levy to the general fund as well. Page 30 is the police pension fund. This is a fund where we needed to get that deficit back up in the black, and we expect that will happen in 2017 with the assumption of shifting some of the appropriations to the edit fund. That's on line 17, shifting $323,000 to edit. That should allow you to have about $160,000 at the end of 2017. And then we've shifted some property tax back and forth. We could potentially shift a little bit more from police to general going into the future. We'll have to see how that plays out. And then the last fund is on page 31. This is your sanitary district bond fund. And really, the state has all the control, really, over your property tax levy, unless you issue a new bond, and then perhaps, depending on the term, the levy can go up or down, depending on what kind of bond issue, what term you have. So right now, we're just projecting, as it stands now, that you're going to issue a bond in 2018 with a 20-year term. Should that change, we can put those assumptions into this report and see how that plays out. I will tell you that levies in the sanitary district bond fund do affect the city. It's not just the sanitary district. So, in other words, if you increase the levies in the sanitary district bond fund, it could potentially increase circuit breaker loss in the city funds. So there's kind of that happening that you've got to be aware of if you're making changes to the levies. The rest of the schedules are just really supplementary data that back up what we have in the report. So what questions do you have for me at this point?
Paige, I'm sure tomorrow's headline is probably going to say that we're going to be asked to do new revenue with the will tax. Could you kind of explain, right now I know the state, added more fees to state level, and then the county has a will tax. So how does that work with the city? Would people in the city pay two taxes? How does that work? Potentially,
yes. The General Assembly allowed municipalities, just starting in, I think it was 16, to have their own municipal wheel tax. So should you decide to adopt something like that, then yes, potentially a taxpayer could pay two wheel taxes. And really, the intent behind that legislation just was to provide you more options.
Okay, and how does the legislation with the new motor vehicle fund saying that 50% of it has to use be used for benefits and stuff. Could you explain how that works?
Yes. So 50% of just the state distributed piece, at least 50% of that needs to be used for road improvements, construction, maintenance of roads. There's actually a memo that defines every piece or every item that you can use with that. But yes, at least 50% of the state distribution must be used for that. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use it for personal services, though. If you can tie the salaries and wages to specific projects, that would fall under the 50% limitation.
Is there any rules regarding the wheel tax that has to be used on, for lack of a better word, asphalt?
Wheel tax must be used for the exact same uses as motor vehicle highway. And in fact, you would deposit it in your motor vehicle highway account. So whatever you're using motor vehicle highway for right now, that's what wheel tax can also be used for. So it can be used for salaries and wages, road maintenance, things of that nature, asphalt.
Okay, now I just have one more question. I'm sure the other council members have questions. What was your guys' role in the financial plan? Were you given every piece of information that you needed to do this? Were you given limitations on revenue only, revenue cuts only? What was your, did they give you the keys to the car and say drive it, or did you have limitations on what you were able to do?
We did not have any limitations. We had full cooperation from the administration. We prepared this plan much the way we do plans for other municipalities, where we go in and ask for financial data from the last 2 or 3 years and really dive into that data.
Excuse, I don't mean to interrupt you, but was it on data that had been audited or not audited? Like 2016 and 17, we haven't been audited
It was
yet.
not audited yet,
Okay.
obviously, because I think your audit was just issued.
So,
But it was balanced as far as balance to the bank.
okay, so in
Yes.
2000, so what information you said the past couple of years would be 2016 and 17, or how far
It
back
was,
did you go?
well, this is our second time doing this. So for this particular report, we got 14, 15, and 16.
Okay.
So
two-
14 was part of the audit, your
So
last audit.
2 of the 3 years were audited?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have.
If,
Councilman Azar?
if the state would adopt the LOIT, you're saying that revenue would be 3.8 approximately?
And again, we're just using an assumption. I have no idea what the county is planning to adopt or if they're going to adopt, but our assumption was, okay, what if they adopt a 0.4% LOIT? That would generate 3.8, 3.9 million.
So if they did that, then according to your figures here, we wouldn't need any other additional revenue to rebuild the balances over that 5-year period.
Right, that would essentially cover you the next 5 years to not only eliminate the deficit, but rebuild the balances as well.
Okay, thank you. I yield.
Councilwoman Crossen?
Yes, following up on what President Massey was asking about earlier, there isn't very much in here about spending cuts or proposed spending cuts. So were your parameters not consider that? I mean, you make a few general references to it. I guess it's on the executive summary.
Yeah, we did make a few general references. You know, what we tend to do is we try to avoid, okay, let me start over. Whenever there's a situation like this with deficits and funding deficits, you really have 2 options. One is to reduce spending. Number 2, increase revenue. In this case, we've noted that the city has reduced quite a bit of spending, and we don't want to tell the city where you need to cut, but certainly if you wanted to just not focus on new revenues, you'd have to cut 3.8 million of permanent reductions. And right now, it looks like, at least in the general fund, you're down to the bare bones. You'd be eating into now personal services, salaries, employees. So we typically, when we do these plans for any municipality, we tend to try to focus on revenue sources. But certainly, the expenditure side is another piece too. If we see that year after year, maybe you're spending a lot of capital, then we might say, hey, think about a bond issue instead of purchasing that capital out of your reserves. But that's not really what we were seeing here. So that's a great point. We didn't focus on the expenditure piece, but if you had to cut, I think we even said that in the report, that you'd have to cut, let's say we just forget about new revenue sources, you'd have to cut 11.4% or something out of your personnel That'd be a pretty significant cut, but certainly that's the other side of the story, the other piece.
Well, and I think that's, I mean, obviously for the reasons you said, it's important, and, but it's also a great concern because so much of this revenue that you're talking about, we don't control, and to the extent that we do, we have a populace that's already kind of reeling from need for revenue here in the city, but also several other reasons in our community and schools and some other reasons. So do you have, in that regard, do you have any, other than the general things that you suggested over here, and I think some of them you even pointed out would be fairly small reductions?
Yeah, they are, yeah.
Do you discuss any other kinds of spending cuts?
We would be happy to discuss them with the council, with the mayor. And by the way, we were not told, don't think about spending cuts. We looked at that piece of it, but we have noted, and I think I noted there was $6 million worth of cuts already that the city has. You know, when you look at that one graph, that chart where I showed your expenditures since 2008 or 2009, it's not like your spending's increasing, you know, hand over fist. I mean, that really isn't the issue. The heart of the issue are those circuit breaker tax credits. But yeah, I totally agree with you. The cutting of the spending would be a piece of it, but, you know, I think that's where you need to decide. Are there places that can be cut? I'm not so sure.
Thank you, Aileen.
Mm-hmm.
Councilman Elliott?
Yes, I've got, should be no surprise, a number of comments. A number of them have already been shared with Paige through emails. Let's take a peek first at page 32. I just want to point out we had deficit cash balance situations back in 2013. If you look at those totals of $4 million, then it went to $5.8 million, and then it finally went to $11.3 million. And now the reason we're given is the state's required to consider the property tax cap loss in the 2017 budget. So if we were taking advantage of that exception, I guess good for the state for putting that in there. You might note the increase from 2014 to 2015 is pretty significant. This always brings back to me the infamous $6 million of miscellaneous revenue that was included on our Form 2 for 2015, our public-private partnership. That money never materialized, never came in, but yet at the same time, the council in late 2014 approved the longevity pay for police and fire that was phased in 2015, 16, and 17. And when we get to the end of 17, that's a cumulative cost of about $4.5 million for that. So that's just a preface of we didn't pay attention to these negative balances when they first appeared, and I don't think responded appropriately back in 2015. Now, Paige, it seems like it would be a lot simpler if we could just transfer cash from edit to the general fund and forget about all these appropriation moves, but apparently that's not an option, huh?
Correct. That is not an option anymore. When the legislation changed to combine the local income tax, for whatever reason, that was taken out. Because before that legislation was passed, the council, well, even the mayor by executive order could transfer from edit.
Our general fund and departments has hundreds of line items, so picking and choosing which items are going to be moved from this fund to that fund is going to be a fun process with the administration. I do also want to remind us, I mean, I was kind of expecting like a $2 million surplus in the general fund for 2017, and we'll see what that, I guess, would have been without any of these changes as time passes. We're reminded all the time about the property tax cap losses and the fact that they're greater here than in other parts of the state. Why is that? Is it because our rate was so high to begin with?
I'm trying to think of a good way to answer this. I think it's because your net assessed value, your tax base, has not been growing over the past several years.
But I mean, we were
Which
hit hard
drives
from
the rate
start,
up.
though, so
Right,
that
I know.
could have been an issue from the start.
Tax rate certainly is an issue. So your tax rate from the start, I mean, from the start, it wasn't as significant. When it was phased in 2010, you had a 9% loss. So that was pretty low, but I think as we went throughout the years and your levy started increasing because of the growth factor, just the statewide annual growth factor, and that tax base was stagnant. In fact, I think over the last 10 years, it's been like a negative 1% growth. So that playing together or going together is driving those circuit breakers up. So I think it's a combination of things, tax rate, tax base.
Terre Haute Competes Group had that as one of their initiatives, and they have a significant concern about the assessed valuation of commercial property and ratio analysis or whatever, and how that's been done, and so on and so forth. So hopefully we'll address that as a community. And I know as far back as 2 or 3 years ago, I remember the mayor mentioning that in different things. In the funds that we used in this analysis, I had identified early on a number of funds that I thought had a positive cash balance, and reported those to the mayor, and thought, well, can we work with these funds? 2 of them didn't get into this analysis. The engineering non-reverting fund has about a $380,000 balance. And Terre Haute Fire Department Contractual Services Fund, it has about a $152,000 balance. Well, that's over $500,000 that is sitting there that didn't come into play in this analysis for some reason or another.
Well, yeah, I can explain the reason why they didn't come into this analysis, because those 2 funds are used for, or limited to very specific purposes. But certainly if the city can find some things that they're paying for out of general that could be paid out of these funds, that would definitely be an
I
option.
thought it paid for a number of engineering salaries. But it
So-
doesn't pay for all of them.
Right, so,
Okay. All right, so if we need to work it, let's work it. Explain the bond downgrade information. You said it has limited the city's access to needed capital in the future.
simply,
What is our current access to capital in the future?
well, simply speaking, it limits your ability to sell bonds because of your low rating.
Okay, and now we're coming out with a proposed $70 million property tax.
This is for civil city, not sanitary district. Sanitary district has a different bond rating. I don't know what that is off the top of my head,
Oh,
but,
okay.
yeah. That,
Didn't
sorry.
know that.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's see, on page 10, the targeted balances, I guess I have 2 questions. I'd like to know how you arrived at $9,623,974 for the general fund. The general fund has about $33 million disbursements. 15% of that, substantially less than $9.6 million. And
Because
I
we
also-
added in the deficit.
Huh?
We added in the deficit. There's an annual deficit amount that we added to that. This is actually to bring it up, to eliminate the deficit and bring it up to a 15% reserve.
But the deficit's already factored in the $2 million.
The previous deficit, this would be the deficit going forward. Like in 18, there's a budget deficit, like a difference between your receipts and disbursements. So that's how we arrived at that number. I can take another look at it if, but that's how we arrived at the number.
What are the total expenditures of all these funds? 60 million?
Yeah, I don't know.
You got that page up in the front? I think it showed them being 51 million. Page 3?
For 2016, it was 51 million. That's actual expenditures. This is based on budget.
Okay, so 15% of 51 million is 7.5?
I can't do math in my head, so
Okay,
I'll
10% of 50 million,
Okay,
5 million. 5% of 50 million is 2.5 million. So that'd be 7.5 million. Is what I get.
Plus each of
Our
these-
fund balance at 15%.
right. And then we add on, okay, so we have a deficit up at the top of the page, okay? That was at the beginning of 2018. There's also deficits in some of these funds between receipts and disbursements, meaning you got to take care of the overall budget deficit before you can start increasing the reserve levels. So that's how that was at least the theory behind it, how we arrived at those numbers. You know, part of that 9 million, Earl, is the 5 million that needs to be repaid to the redevelopment commission in 2018. Because if it wasn't repaid in 18, then on the very first line, that would be negative 7
I'm
million.
with you, that's why we're having
Okay,
this.
I know, I'm
having
just,
this discussion.
yes.
But on page 33, the 2,157,000 includes all the deficits already that were existing that we need to cover. That's why it's minus 2,157,000.
So the,
Based on those comments,
Yeah,
I'll give
right.
that some further thought.
okay.
On page 15, in the 2017 column, the service and charges are $3.5 million.
Yes.
Okay? Through June 30 of 2016, our professional services incurred to date are only $1.2 million. So that means we got $2.3 million left to go in the last 6 months of 16. Now, I was under the impression we had $600,000 sitting in the Board of Works Contractual Services Fund related to the additional payment on the trash contract that won't be needed to pay the trash contract, because that's paid out of it. So I'm not expecting an actual number near that high unless there's something else that's getting tossed in there that I don't know
She's
about.
factoring in 100% spent. She doesn't give us
Absolutely.
any credit. For instance, like DLGF, 100% spent, so we've got a little cushion there. We've got $650,000 in the Board of Public Works for services contractual, and, you know, we've got some 911 costs we're gonna have to pay a little bit more on this year out of there, but that's really it. We've got enough to cover the trash contract.
Okay, but
With those revenues.
But we're making all these, appropriation shifts down there. We can't take out the amount of that trash.
We're going to. When we bring you the final plan with the exact line items, we'll reflect all that.
Right.
Dave doesn't know that. She
Right.
can't. That's up
So-
to us to take this now. Once we get consensus here, then we'll drill it down to those line items. And we'll be able to take advantage of that. It's going to help us even more. We'll
Yeah.
have more of a cushion
It's going to show up when?
when we provide the appropriations.
This,
It would
this,
be all the details of all those transfers.
Okay.
We'll take advantage of that at that point.
Okay. Page 17. There's a significant increase in 2017 disbursements over 2016. Line 24, $3.1 million to $3.8 million.
I don't recall the increase. I would have to look at the budget. I would assume that there's some road projects a part of that, but I'd have to look at the detailed budget, and I could certainly do that. I just don't recall what the increase is. By the way, these budgets are based on council-adopted budgets, so until we get some information as to what you might reduce out of the budget, we are just, like the mayor said, we're assuming 100%. So certainly, anything that can be reduced would go a long way to help
I'd
with.
be surprised if our budget is $3.8 million for expenditures, but I...
That's
I will
what was
look at it. I do have
adopted
that.
by the council.
Okay, page 20. Total operating disbursements in the cemetery fund, 518 to 599. Would that be another one where we probably use the budget amounts and don't allow for any underspend?
Yes, we used adopted budget. Yes.
Of the approved budget. Every,
Okay. Where do we currently charge the 911 dispatch costs? Is that in edit?
this year, in the past, since we can't use property tax and we got to phase that out, we should.
Earl, just a moment. I just want to let everybody know that's been coming in, that we are doing a financial plan presentation and that we're going to continue this and we'll have a recess and start moving with our regular sunshine meeting here shortly.
Okay. Page 23, I just want to make sure we understand that none of the trash contract is being paid out of the general fund, the way this works.
And that's really just for this year, because we have the residual money from last year, 16, that we carried over to 17. But as we move forward, we will need some supplemental, beginning in 18, we will have to supplement that.
But this shows it being shifted to edit, that's what this,
Yeah, that's what they had proposed, but once again, we didn't know, they didn't know about the 300,000 that we shifted over there until later in the process. We had extra money last year that we collected, we started with tax in July, paid out what we could at the end, received additional revenue at the end of the year, and when we add that to this year's revenues, we're going to be able to cover the contract for this year.
so watch for changes on that page, is that what you're telling
We
me?
have just one time only. One
Okay.
time, just this year only.
I agree with Councilman Nation's line of thinking to reduce the $5 million borrowing number. Emailed you to that effect, wanting to get to 4 or lower, basing that upon what I believe the council's attitude towards short-term borrowings is, as we discussed it several times this year, which makes me question, why don't we just put the rainy day fund out of its misery, and the Parks Non-Reverting Fund out of its misery? That's nearly $300,000, and then take another $700,000 of edit and make that borrowing 4. That's my recommendation or goal. On page 28, CCD, what services and charges are those that are paid out of there?
We typically buy capital items out of computers,
But it's services and charges.
and there's some contractual services. I think that in the past, we've used some of that for 911 and split it between,
Okay.
I can't remember which.
So if we can get some details on that, at least I'd like
They're
to
just
know.
big chunks, it's not little stuff, they're big chunks.
Well, that's going to make it easier then.
It will.
Okay, good deal. Page 29. Fire pension, personal services. What's the rationale for continued increases in line 13?
That's just simply, we worked in a 2% increase to disbursements across the board except for capital outlays. An assumption that we just built into the model, that's our standard assumption. That could easily be changed if you don't think your costs are going to increase by 2% a year.
Okay, I mean, the number of pensioners isn't going to go up, is it?
I mean, sometimes there could be death benefits that need to be paid out. I mean,
The state reimburses us if a
Right.
property amount, we get 100% reimbursement, so that can be a variation that we need to fund it with additional dollars, but the actual expense and payout part doesn't go, we just may not receive the reimbursement for it.
Okay, well, do we
But
need,
that's probably,
do we need an actuarial study or something of the pensioner class here and kind of sort out what that might be?
possible. And take a look at, I don't know, you actually look at the age and other things, there's dependents and, yeah, we can do that. I don't know if that's ever been done.
Well, I think I'd give some thought to that, because I would really expect over a 5-year period, that line item will go down.
Slowly go down, right? I think
Because there aren't any more pensioners coming on.
So they just based on 2%.
I know.
That's how they-
Yeah.
So we can adjust that.
I don't know. Page 30. I did note that increase in property tax revenue for 2018 was a pretty significant number. Just wanted to mention that. Page 31. Why the decline in property tax revenue from 2017 to 2018?
Because that was based upon the assumed bond issue in 2018. I know you don't make your first payments until 19, but the property tax levy is based on the 2 payments in 18 plus 15% of that 19 payment. So the way the DLGF works, that you would actually see a decline in property tax because you don't need that much revenue if you did a 20-year bond issue. Now, if you did something different, the schedule would look different, obviously.
Okay. Now, you had emailed to me a property tax revenue schedule that I had asked for,
Yes.
and thank you for getting that. You can take one and pass those around. The question that I've got, the main question I've got from looking at that
Yes.
is the decline from 2017 to 2018 of $1.3 million.
That really, it's attributable to the sanitary district levy going down. If you would add up, if you look at the sanitary district at the bottom, it's going from 6.5 to 4.4. If you just looked at just the civil city funds and left out that sanitary district, it's actually going up about 4%.
Okay.
So it really is attributable to that sanitary district bond.
Okay. And I'm sure Dean's expecting to hear from me Monday.
Yes, I'm sure he is.
Discussion about this issue.
Yes.
Because it just doesn't make sense to forego the property tax revenue and have a lot longer bond term if you can keep the property tax revenue and reduce the bond term. Just for council's information, I mean, there's like a $70 million property tax bond issue that's being proposed to pay for phase 2 of the long-term control plan, which, according to documents we were given last November, that was a $37 million project. So,
That comes before us next month, correct, Mayor?
Next week. The explanation
Okay,
will be here next Thursday to walk through all that.
But the council will vote on those bonds, okay.
so I got a lot of questions and need a lot of information for me to understand how we got a document in November of 16 that says $37 million, and then now we got a $70 million plus $15 million revenue-based bond issue that's being proposed. We've gone from 37 to 85, and the total cost of 2 through 5 was about 90, if I remember right. So we're going to shoot well past the $120 million total.
That's the thing we need to keep in mind, is that 120 is our number. And so when we're talking about phase 4 and 5, we're going to have to renegotiate because we will have reached our number. We will go back and talk about phase 4 and 5.
Okay.
They don't just keep shooting the number up.
I would rather renegotiate before we commit to 70, the 80s or whatever for this. What are we going to get, a mega lift station then?
No, that's just, 7 years ago, the engineering estimate is just much different now, and we beefed up some things that will help us with phase 4 and 5 to reduce costs. So that'll explain.
Okay. Well, those of you that were here when the 120 need to be approved, we'll be relying on you to help the newbies that are on council with that. But I just want a full analysis of either option that factors in the interest costs, additional interest costs that would be incurred by giving up the property tax revenue. I'm just having difficulty with that. And think that's it. I just want to reiterate my goal of that $5 million going down. Just a lot of information, great information. I think you made it about as easy to follow as one could, and I certainly, certainly appreciate that. The end result is deficit balances reducing and positive balances reducing, and kind of meeting in the middle. Here, I yield.
I have a couple more questions. You had mentioned part of our problems with property tax caps is that we are losing, quite a bit of tax base, and it seems like part of the plan is to use edit money, which we use a lot of acronyms here where people might not realize that's economic development, income, and tax. It seems like we're shooting ourselves in the foot if we're using money that's meant to help build our tax base. So how many other communities are using edit money? And I know the legislation was changed to allow cities to do that, but how many cities are actually using a big portion of their edit money on operating expenses?
I can really only speak to the cities that I work with closely, obviously, on these plans. The cities that in my experience, the cities that are heavily impacted by circuit breaker loss are utilizing their edit funds to cover operations. Maybe not wholly, not, using the entire amount of it. They're at the point where they just have to do that because there aren't any other revenue sources. So I can't really give you a number, but I'm going to say it's common with the municipalities I work with that are heavily impacted by circuit breaker.
Okay, and then one last one for me. How many other communities, first off, Mayor, if you bring, speaking for myself, if you bring a will tax to us, I'm going to vote against it, but how many other communities are using a will tax?
I do not know the answer to that question either, but I know that there have been municipalities over the last 2 years that have adopted it, and I could probably provide that to you, the exact city and what they adopted, because really these cities, again, that are trying to recoup from these circuit breaker losses are looking at every possible option. So there have been a number of cities that have adopted it, and I'd be happy to try to find that list for you.
Okay, and I know we're going to send some questions to the mayor that, that'll probably be one that we'd like to have. So, Councilman DeBon.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, on page 16, line 44, the repayment of temporary loan warrants, there's no number in there for 2017 nor for anything after. I assume that's a practice we're not going to be able to end in the near future. Will that impact this plan at all?
Well, we typically don't build in tax anticipation warrants that go in and out in the same year because it's a wash. So, it's possible that you'll still need to do that, but as you build up your fund balances, it'll be less and less need for that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Crossen.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on Councilman Elliott's concern about the redevelopment fund loans, and I certainly share that, and just this week had conversation with redevelopment staff about the amount of concerns that they, especially downtown TIF funds, that they have a big list of things that they've prioritized to be done that they're unable to do because we're using this money for the general fund, and I really want to see us get away from that as soon as possible because those funds were generated for those purposes, and we need them. We need them to deal with our infrastructure. So I yield.
Mayor, do you want to summarize this for us?
Yeah, just briefly, but I will take exception to that, that there's not any money to do that. There's $2 million sitting in the bank right now that could be used. They don't have anything planned at all. They've not shared anything with me at all that there are any specific plans outside of their redevelopment plan that they adopted. So if they do that, that's great, but they haven't done that yet. And so that's purely speculation.
Mayor, I've got to stop you there. I went to that meeting too. I looked at a big list of stuff on Steve Witt's door. there are 10 projects. This is stuff that has been ongoing for years. There's a pile of streetlights that's been sitting, brand-new streetlights that's been sitting in the police department parking lot for over a year, and there's no money to install them. That's tax increment finance district money, that's the downtown TIF, that's exactly what that stuff's made for, or being collected for, and I'm sorry, but you're wrong, based on information that we just got 2 days ago. I mean,
No, there's money sitting in that bank account right now. If they wanted to spend that to put those lights up, they could do it tomorrow. That is absolutely true. It's in the bank. It's sitting in the bank account as we speak. Says you're getting bad information. It is sitting there. It's at their disposal of the redevelopment commission to decide to spend that money.
the redevelopment commission at your behest has decided to loan that money to the city of Terre Haute to shore up operating expenses. And that's why there's only $12,000 unallocated money.
It's simply not true. So I guess I would wrap this up from the perspective that we want to reduce that borrowing too. Absolutely, there's no question about that. Borrowing money from redevelopment and keeping them from doing anything, if they roll out their plan for next year and they've got another $1 million they want to spend, then we'll ensure that that $1 million is in the downtown TIF district to be spent, or whatever, and plus a cushion beyond that. There's no question about that. It didn't affect anything this year, and it hadn't affected anything on any plans that have been shown to me. Or maybe some of you are getting something, but I'm not getting anything then. And I don't think that's the case. So we can make that work. My goal would be what we're asking to do is if we do the $5 million in December, then that all gets paid back in June, and we are looking at probably for the rest of the year needing about $2 to $2.5 million, depending on things that shake out. So they'll not only get a tax disbursement this fall and next spring, and as an example, the 46 TIF districts owed about $800,000 right now from the airport. We're talking about another $1.5 million available to the TIF districts of not doing anything differently. And so we can make that work. And I absolutely want them to continue to spend money and do things. That's what it's for, and it needs to be spent on this project. This is a temporary situation for us to work through, and it makes more sense to borrow money at a zero interest than it is to do the tax anticipation warrant. I think there needs to be a balance. We ought to try to lower the tax anticipation warrant a little bit and then keep redevelopment. So we can balance that, lower them both, and save money that way. So that's what we'll propose. But I think from a perspective of what Paige has shared with you tonight, obviously we're trending in the right direction. I'm not going to propose a wheel tax. I don't support that. So hopefully the paper and other media sources here tonight won't be trying to, sell that. They did their job by providing us, here's the options available to us as the administration and the council. That's all we got. And so we could reduce and lay off a couple hundred people, or we can see how some things play out with the revenues that are being discussed. But now I'm not going to propose any new revenues. So I'll end it on that.
Okay. And then, was public sector part of this group helping with your plan?
They did the plan. We
Okay.
provided the information to them.
Okay. And then I had sent you an email inquiring about terms and where
And
we're
I sent
at.
that all out to you today.
Okay.
All of council should have that information.
Okay.
I didn't bring a paper copy, but you all got an email right after lunch with that information in it.
Just so people know, I'd asked for where we're at on our apparatus for fire, since we're going to be asking these quite a bit from EMS fund.
Yeah, it doesn't affect it at all. So all that money is carved out to us to continue to implement our 20-year plan. And it's in there. And one other thing I would, just one other thing I was thinking about the edit. Some of these edit transfers are one time. So we're trying to get this budget whole. We're not talking about doing the same amount every year. So we're not going to deplete the edit fund forever. It's a one-time thing. We're still going to leave well over probably about a $2.5 million cash balance at the end of this year.
But that's 1 year less economic development we're doing in our community.
But we still have $2.5 million left over.
Okay, I think people would wonder where that money's going, so I yield. Anybody else have anything? Councilman Morris?
Page 6, page 8, the executive summary. Number 6, I do know that Chief Fisher has met with Rose Hallman, and they are paying some fees in lieu of taxes. I hope that it grows in the future percentage-wise. Mayor, I know you've got bids for the city-owned golf courses. I don't know how long you've had those.
About a month.
About a month?
Yep.
Okay. Is there going to be a decision made yet?
This fall, we'll make a decision. There's still some work to do on that.
And going down to 10, I know you and I had met with the commissioners about the possibility of combining services. Actually, we were told there would be no discussion until the jail's built. But I just want to ask if any further communication has been with the county.
No, and, with the Terre Haute Competes group, that particular group did not come up with any recommendations
Well, I
yet.
do
So
know-
they still have work to do.
Judy Anderson had casually mentioned in passing that, another possibility could be parks. Mr. Golden opportunity to keep approval, but I would hope that would continue some more discussions of combining services.
I think it'll be important that a group like Terre Haute Competes would continue to look at that from a neutral, objective standpoint, taxpayers, to help us further that conversation.
And I think that would absorb number 9 there of purchasing agent for the county and the city altogether, so I think that would help. I yield.
Sorry, have none.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved to adjourn by Councilman Azar, second by Councilwoman Aller. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned. We're going to take about a 10-minute recess.